on, everyone? It's your guy Cole Jackson back with a new series here on Two Guys Watching Football. It's the Ravens Roundtable, where we're going to be bringing smart people together every week, maybe bi-weekly, and getting into some interesting topics. Tonight, we're going to be starting with a little bit of a preview of the 2022 NFL Scouting Combine coming to you this week. And I have three of the top evaluators, I'll call them, from around the Ravens flock. Super pumped to get these guys together. To kind of talk about, the combine at a high level and how to put it into your draft evaluation, and then getting into some of the athletic testing and how to improve, or what's the right word, how to take that information in, and what drills do you look at, do you not look at, and then we're also going to talk about some players that could really show out this week. But before we get into it, let's introduce the guys going around the horn. Let's start with my guy, my co-founder of the Two Guys Watching Football YouTube channel and member of the Deep Cover podcast. It's Michael Crawford at Abukari MC. My man, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. Can't complain. Humbled to be among this illustrious group. You said you wanted to have smart people on. I was looking around. I'm like, yeah, Cole's smart, Chris is smart, James is smart, and I'm here. So it's a good group of people, and we're all into the draft big time, and combine's coming up, so it's going to be fun to kind of chop all of this stuff up.
Love it. And we have the second third of the Deep Cover podcast. Of course, Carrie's not with us, but we're always thinking of Carrie. Love listening to Carrie. Go at it with you guys. It's Chris Aguilera of Deep Cover at Chris Just Joking. How's it going, my guy?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to get into this discussion. I feel like it's one that isn't had enough, in my opinion, as far as the evaluation process goes. It's always just players. But I think digging deeper into what that means, I think that's an important discussion too.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I just literally before we started this had a tweet with I think it was Spencer Schultz tweeting with Kent Platt, at MathBomb, that puts out the RAS numbers about just how important the combine is. And I replied to it saying I used to be one of those dinks, and MC knows as well, that says the combine doesn't matter. And that was always kind of a reaction to people that would just, kind of look at the combine and then be like, this player's really fast, let's draft him. And it just used to always bug me, but it's obviously really important data. So I'm really excited to cut it up. And lastly, we have James Ogden at NFL Ogden, burning the midnight oil, joining us at 12:15 UK time. Also a member of UK Ravens, Russell Street Report, and his own site, redstarbaltimore.com, where he's going to be dropping a plethora of scouting reports. Super excited for that. How's it going, James?
It's good, thanks, Cole. It's pretty late, but excited to talk about the combine. The combine was the last frontier in terms of prime time that the NFL did. I used to be able to take some days off, watch it during the day. Now I've got to be watching guys running 40s at 2:00 in the morning. So
there you go. Yeah, it's funny you said that, because I just literally put in a leave request for work for the first Thursday, Friday March Madness, and I was like, I'm not missing these games. I'm just parking my butt on the couch. But sometimes it's nice. I got the TV set up right beside me here, so it's nice when I'm working just to kind of have the combine going all day, every day for kind of 5 days. So looking forward to that. So let's get into our first discussion topic. We're just going to I'm going to throw it out there. We'll kick it around the horn. I'll probably mix up who to start with, who to throw it to, and we'll just kind of, walk through these questions and have a little bit of a discussion. So number one, I want to start kind of at a high level, because I think what Chris mentioned is really important. And it's kind of, we get all this information, all this data from the scouting combine. So what I want to know is how you guys, as people that are engaged in the evaluation process and kind of go start to finish, how do you guys factor that information into your broader player evaluations? And Chris, I'll kick it to you first.
So I'm not one of these people that it's like just tape only, just numbers only. It's a marriage, it has to be a marriage. And for example, if you have questions about a guy's long speed and then he comes in and runs slow, all right, your eyes didn't lie to you. The testing, it proved what your eyes saw. Then there's sometimes like Justin Jefferson. I think everybody forgets when Justin Jefferson came out, nobody thought he was that fast. Everybody was like, yeah, he probably run like 4.4, nothing too crazy. Came out and ran faster than everybody thought he would. And then it kind of makes you go back, and you're like, all right, I got to go back and see if I saw that. But then you got it on the flip side with a guy we're well aware of, like Miles Boykin. Miles Boykin has one of the most beautiful mock draftable profiles you'll ever see in your life, but that just doesn't show up on tape. So you kind of have to not put too much emphasis on it, but it isn't pointless either. Like you said earlier, Cole, you have to marry the two together and kind of find the balance in that, and then also going with the official measurements too, because we're mostly going by school, what schools tell us. If I was at a school, I would want them to give me 3 extra inches of my height. Like let me get that 3 extra inches. But when you go to the combine, there's no lying there. It is what it is. That's what you are. That's what your arm length is. Not for offensive linemen. That's a different discussion. But for other positions, it's very, very, very important. I think balance, like with everything, there has to be balance. So taking it into equation, but also not letting it be the end all be all.
Yeah, well said, well said. James, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Chris. That's exactly it, and I think MC and I will probably at various points in this discussion refer to either explicitly or implicitly to the Scouting Academy, where we both learn how to sort of evaluate players a bit more like you see in the NFL. And I think one of the things for me that I always struggle with is there's play speed and play strength. And when we talk about play speed and play strength, we're talking about the reality of how fast you are on a football field because of the different things that you do. And what goes into play speed is your measurable speed plus your processing plus your technique. And sometimes it's hard to work out the kind of concoction of those three things that make someone fast on the field or make someone not fast on the field. It's difficult. You look at it, you think you know what you see. You think you maybe see a guy with good technique, with good measurable speed, but maybe doesn't process quickly enough. And so you make a hypothesis, but the measurable speed and indeed the measurable strength that you get, measurements from the combine, sort of make you realize what was the makeup of that. You might see a guy who you thought was really fast, actually wasn't, and it's the same thing that Chris was saying before. So I think it's just really important as an extra check, and that you use it, as Chris says, as something that's important, and not sort of dismiss it entirely. Yeah.
And MC, my man.
Okay, can I piggyback on something James said real quick?
Absolutely.
So he said the play speed thing, and the first player that came to my mind was the linebacker from Wisconsin, Chris Borland, who retired early from the 49ers. He was slow as can be at the combine, but on the field, his processing made him faster than some 4.3 guys. So when you say it's not the end all be all, that's what we mean, is that you have to marry both of them.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Before I kick it to MC, I just want to kind of give my thoughts on that, because I think what it can also do is show someone's potential. So, when you think of a Patrick Queen, for example, obviously he ran a really good 40, tested really well. He's a high level athlete, right? And we've seen him struggle at times to have that play speed on the field, mostly because of the processing, not necessarily because of the athletic testing. Well, like you just said, it can go both ways, right? Like you can see a guy, I think a good guy to mention here is someone like Leo Chanel. Apparently, Leo Chanel is going to go out there and post a really, really high level 40 time because of his straight line speed. I think he was on the freaks list from Bruce Feldman, and I forget what he mentioned his 40 was, but it's supposed to be pretty impressive. But he's not that kind of guy in terms of being quick in coverage, and that may be because of other things like stiffness in his hips that can prevent that lateral movement. So it doesn't mean that a 40 time just naturally makes you a fast player on the field, but it can also be on the flip, and you can see, okay, if this guy starts to click mentally like a Patrick Queen, that's going to show what their potential can be. And that's where I think in the past, I underrated the combine and its impact. It gives you important data pieces that you factor in, but I think it can also show someone's upside, especially if you see some processing issues on their tape. But I'll kick it over to you, MC.
So last thing I'll say on that, because that's a really interesting point in and of itself. I think, and you mentioned Patrick Queen, but I think seeing these two guys together, seeing Patrick Queen and Josh Bynes on the field together, and seeing the way that Josh Bynes can still make plays, tackles for loss, even plays kind of a little bit more out on the perimeter, like a bubble screen or quick screen or something. And you see him get there so fast, sometimes even before Patrick Queen. Josh Bynes, he ran a 4.81 back in 2011. What he's running now. You can see the play speed so clearly illustrated with the way that he plays, that because he's able to use all of that information that an offense is presenting to him, formation, motion, his individual keys, whether he's reading offensive linemen or the running back or a tight end, stance, all kind of little things, right? He's able to put all of that together, and his computer, his mental processor, is probably still as fast as anything out there, and probably faster, just because of the experience that he has under the belt, where maybe his body can't necessarily do some of the things that it used to do, but you see a guy who can still play at a really effective level because of that. But anyway, for the combine, I agree with everything that you guys have all said. I was going to say it's a piece of the puzzle for me as well, but I like Chris's analogy of a marriage. I'm coming up on 17 years here this year of being married. And when you're trying to make decisions, when you guys are on the same page, when things line up, a lot of those decisions go more smoothly. Whether it turns out good or bad, if you've been on the same page and you're aligned in how you think about it, it still can go smoothly, even if things don't work out the way that you thought. But when you don't, when there's misalignment, then, that's where there's some tension and some other things that can come in. And so that's kind of like the combine and film. When those two things align, when what you see on film aligns with the athletic testing, then you feel pretty comfortable about your evaluation. When they're misaligned, it raises questions, right? And you start to try to figure out, okay, well, why isn't this lining up? I thought he played at this level, at this speed on film, but I saw something different at the combine. Like maybe it was slower. A lot of times you see the flip side. A guy runs like really fast or really moves well and performs well in testing. You're like, I did not see that on the field. So it raises questions, which is a good thing, because then that makes you go back and kind of watch and really, really like drill down to make sure you can understand. As James and I were talking about something earlier today, we're observing stuff from film, right? And then we're trying to understand why it happened or why it didn't happen. And so that's the part of the whole process that's really kind of fun to me. And then, of course, the medical part, I think we'd be remiss. We said, look, that's probably the most important part of what happens at the combine. And that's the part.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, because when I did the podcast last week with Mink and Downing, they kind of asked me about some guys with the most to prove, and someone I kind of mentioned loosely, but I should have probably mentioned more in that section, was Derek Stingley, as a guy that, it's not necessarily his testing that's going to, or his athletic testing, his measurements that are going to maybe, I don't know if this is, I'm not saying make or break, like in terms of, he's going to be a first rounder, but it could make or break how high he goes. And that's just from his medicals and, getting that information out to all teams. It's really crucial information with guys that have suffered injuries. I think his was the Lisfranc injury in his foot, if I have that right. Super, super good point. So, well said, guys, really well said. And we'll kind of move more specifically into the drills. And now you guys catch me on this, because I kind of put this in our little discussion guide that we have. And then I was like, I don't know if we can talk about this broadly, because it's so position specific, because I want to talk about specific drills. Like, what do you put the most emphasis on? Is there any things you don't pay attention to that much? But then I was like, it doesn't really make sense as a broad question. It might be more specific to a position. So like, if you're looking at the O-line, you might be more interested in the shuttle than the 40 and that sort of thing. Do you guys kind of feel that way? Or is it just, you think all of the information is just kind of, there's purpose to it all? Does that make sense, what I'm kind of asking here? I don't know. Who wants to jump in on that?
I'll jump in. So I think you're right, Cole. I think it's position specific. I think the first thing to say is that one of the sort of important things for teams is that the combine isn't predictive. Like, we need to understand that there are lots of studies out there that you can go and read a lot about that will tell you that the combine, the measurement side of the combine isn't predictive. It won't be wholly predictive of future success. Yeah, as we've said already, it's part of the story. But there will be some red lines that some that some teams have. They will have some red lines around not drafting players, so it will eliminate some players at certain positions. And so there are definitely some things, some measurables that I think you need to look at from a certain perspective on certain positions. And I think I'll go on a different direction on arm length rather than talking about offensive tackles. Talk specifically about cornerbacks, which I think is an interesting to stay out of the controversy. I think cornerback arm length is very, it can be important, and I think there's a really interesting case study in this year's class on arm length, which is Roger McCreary, who's already had his arm length tested at the Senior Bowl, and they were historically short. I mean, like really short arms. But the guy on tape has the best ball skills in the class. So there's some kind of disconnect there. And I personally think it's because his timing and his placement of his hands when he does go for the breakup is phenomenal. It's close to perfection. So how much does that red line matter in the NFL's terms? I think it does matter quite a lot to them, especially when arms and things are as historically short as they are. So I think the measurements in some cases for some positions are very important on the bottom end of the measurement ladder.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, we all know my position on the arm length thing. That's my opinion. I think the Ravens absolutely have a preference in terms of their, like, I would be lying to myself if I didn't say that. That's just a fact. That's how they've trended, right? And so you can't ignore the trend of the team. And I think red line's actually a really interesting point because we hear it all the time. There's been I forget who tweeted it. I feel like it was probably Duke Mayweather because Rashawn Slater was his guy. But, you know, he had that tweet after Slater got the all Pro Bowl nod or whatever the heck it was and said, you know, teams need to evolve how they factor these things into their evaluation. And what he was speaking to was that red line. Guys, you know, taking people off their board or considering them guards and that sort of thing off the measurements. But where I kind of come with that is, and this has always just been my take, is if a guy has poor length and plays with poor length, you're going to see it on film. And we were just talking about this, all four of us last night, talking about George Karlaftis. He's going to measure short this week. That's just a fact. And you can see it on tape. So it's something that I think in that context, as long as I'm seeing it on tape, and that's normally where I challenge folks to talk about it, I just want to see it on tape because if they're doing things that limit that margin of error, and that's really what arm length is to me. It's your margin of error. It can be your margin of error as an offensive tackle. It can also be your margin of error as a cornerback. Talking about McCreary with his anticipation, his ability to break on the ball, longer arms only benefit you in that situation, but it's not a make or break situation. But it's like anything. It's a piece of the puzzle, and it's one of those things where when all the O-line that we've looked at and talked about, when those measurements come out, it's something you're going to consider. A guy we also talked about is Ike Ekwonu. I think he's probably going to measure with shorter arms than, and I think I can see cases of that on his tape. He bends at his waist, overextends. Some of that might be length-related issues. We talked about Charles Cross in a similar light, like all of those guys, but you have to factor in, okay, that's your arm length. That's good to know. Now, how does it impact this player as they play? And we've seen a guy like Patrick McCarry go out there and defy all odds with his little T-Rex arms. God bless him. And essentially, use things like Mike and I have talked about this numerous times, snap timing, angles, his, using good footwork. It impacts his margin of error, but he's using things in his skill set. I always refer to him as like a boxer, and I have a couple clips from that George Karlaftis watch. Boxers short arms that have that reach disadvantage, got to get inside your guy. Same thing. There were times where Karlaftis got up in the guy's grill, quickly, especially against quick sets. Guys really struggled to quick set him because he was so powerful, and they didn't get the advantage of using that reach advantage they have. So very similar concept. But I'll stop ranting. You guys already know my stance on this, but I had to get it off my chest. I'll kick it over to you, Mike. What do you got?
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends on the position. I mean, certain drills and certain tests, I should say tests more than the drills, are going to have more value for certain positions. We've talked about some of them. You think about like a cornerback, you have to run. it's part of what you have to do to play the position. You have to be able to run. So I think the 40 probably means a little bit more for them. But then you look at bigger guys, and you're probably looking at maybe like the 10-yard, right? The 10-yard split to see kind of that explosion, short area explosion, short area burst. Maybe change of direction. For me, those typically tend to be the ones that I focus more on with almost all the positions is change of direction and the explosives, like the jumps, the vert, and the broad. But even some things like the bench, and I know, that's probably the one that probably gets poo-pooed the most because people are like, look, there's other lifts that guys do in the weight room that really are a better indicator of strength. I mean, you hear a lot of people joke and say the bench just kind of really shows that you knew where the weight room was, right? You just knew how to get there, and you actually got in there and did something. But I look at it like, okay, you still got to move that bar, right? And the distance that bar has to travel, you see it every year. Guys with longer arms tend to not put up as many reps as guys with shorter arms. So you still got to move that bar. You still got to move that weight. And, you think about in the trenches guy, or not, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in the trenches. It could be cornerback, wide receiver. In a blocking scenario where you got to strike somebody or you got to punch somebody, how quickly can you do that? How explosively can you extend your arm? Now, where you land them is a big part of that too. That kind of ties into what you guys were saying about arm length. Like, look, a lot of that is about timing and placement, not just raw length. There's a lot of guys with long arms that are way out here, like bear hugging guys, and let them all in their chest, and they can't win reps. So yeah, for me, it's probably position specific, and even the bench I think can have some value. Even though I think it was Dion. I think Dion had like the funniest line on the bench. Like he said, "Look, Jerry Rice or Michael Irvin never laid down on the field and laid across my chest and let me press down." So he was never a big fan of it. And there's been some injuries there the last couple of years, whether it's been at the combine or at guys pro day, guys like tearing pecs and stuff like that, trying to do the bench. So I'm not saying, it's not important, but if we had to pick and they had to say, okay, going down the list of the current tests, which one would you say maybe doesn't give you the most value? And I might lean towards the bench out of everything else they do.
I wanted to press on that because that was something that I was wondering, and I also was wondering, alternatives. Like instead of the bench press, I'd way rather see a guy's, clean or even a squat because it's going to show that explosive power coming from your base, which is more football specific. Really rare that you see a guy, kind of doing a bench press movement. So it doesn't, but like you said, there's still value. It even shows preparation, a guy that could get ready for the combine. We saw guys from Notre Dame come out, Claypool and Boykin back to back, really well prepared. So it does show that. And I think that's important information. Look at a guy like Orlando Brown Jr. came out of Oklahoma, obviously not prepared for the combine, and it dropped him to round 3 where he was largely considered a first rounder. So definitely has value in terms of a guy getting prepared. Chris, what do you think, my guy?
Yeah, I like what James and Mike said. It's definitely, it matters about what position we're talking about here, because 40 doesn't matter for an offensive line as much as it does for a cornerback. I think some of the on the field things that I like is the gauntlet drill for the wide receivers, because you can see how natural and how confident they are with their hands, because there are guys that they just go through it and it's like butter. And then there were other guys where you can see like the smoke coming out their ears because they're like, don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it. And you can really weed out who's comfortable and who's not with that.
I want to go back and watch Brashad Perriman do that drill.
Easy. It's my guy. Easy. He might have got hit in the face, actually. He might be one of those guys. I'm sorry. Forgive me, man. I was wrong. I love it. Always. I'll never give up.
On that. I'm sorry, Chris. Go on.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say on that, like, I don't know if you guys have noticed I feel like the camera work on the All-22 in college is getting worse and worse. And so that gauntlet drill is becoming more and more important for me, because the overhead is way too high for me to see sometimes the manual dexterity in their hands. And then when you go to the end zone, the guy on the camera can't work it quickly enough to get it across to the guy who's making the catch on the boundary. And so I still can't see his hands. So I feel like that Gauntlet drill, I know some people hate it, don't they, because you drop the ball afterwards, but I just feel like for sometimes it's the clearest example you're going to see of the hands.
Well, I was going to say it does show catch technique, and I remember Hakeem Butler being a really interesting guy because on his Iowa State film, I thought it was really obvious that he had poor hand technique with how he tried to catch the ball. Like you could visually see him not making that triangle small enough, and the ball would literally go through his hands. His hands were in the right place. He was trying to use his hands, but it was going through because his triangle was too big. And then so I think he did have 2 drops on his, and you could kind of see it in his hand. So you can see that technique pretty up close and personal. But Chris, I kind of cut you off, so if you want to finish.
Oh no, the other one I wanted to say was the DB drill, where you get to see their hips and you really get to see them open them up, and it kind of shows you who's stiff and who has the oily hips, as Mike Mayhawk used to say. And those things are so important, and especially for a guy like who I'm really high on, and I don't want to steal James's thunder, but Daxton Hill. Like I feel like that's a dude that he's gonna be water in that drill. Like it's just gonna be like dancing at a salsa club doing that drill. So that one's one of my favorites. And going to like what I would like to see them add, I don't really have anything. Like I would need to talk to somebody who's an expert on this, but something to test their flexibility, to see how flexible certain guys are. I think that's so important for football players to just find out how flexible some of these guys are and what are their limitations.
That's a really good one to get the on-field yoga class going, being led by Ben Powers.
And they do. I'd have to look it up. They do have tests for that. And I can't remember the article I read if they test it at the combine, but it's just like one of those behind the scenes things. I think they do. I think it's part of the medical battery that they do.
Oh, yeah?
It's some kind of flexibility measurement because it's something like ankle flexion. They measure like some different things. I remember because it was a couple of years ago about stuff they do behind the scenes.
But I guess that's not really public info, but stuff that they get.
Yeah. But they do it. But like to Chris's point, maybe you could make that.
Yeah.
There's reasons why they don't want to, but that would be an interesting one. And then I think using force plates is pretty interesting one too, because you get to see how guys transfer force in different kind of movements. Because that's a big part.
Okay, so on that, I'm really curious to get your guys' opinion, because this might just be a dumb idea and I probably shouldn't say it, but as I was thinking it through, I was kind of like, what do I learn at the Senior Bowl that I don't learn here? And it's like, what about Chris mentioned the hip turning one for DBs, and they kind of do something similar when they just ask the O-line to just do kick steps, right? And so you can kind of see a little bit of something, but it doesn't really help me that much. But it's an attempt to try and do that. But what if they strapped on pads on one day and did some one-on-ones? What do you got? Is that too dangerous for them? You think it would never happen? Like, what do you guys think?
I think agents will be like, hell no.
You think? Yeah. So I thought about that, but then it's like, why do they do it at the Senior Bowl? Like why? Like what's the difference, right? Like I know one's in January, one's in February, but I don't know. It's just one that I was like, I could learn so much, but that's probably why they don't want me to learn anything. these underclassmen want to sneak under the radar.
And I think it depends on the guys too, because you see that at the All-Star games, like the guys who tend to go to the All-Star games, or guys who think they have an opportunity to raise their stock by going and competing, against.
How pumped was Trevor Penning for the Senior Bowl? Like, how pumped was he to get that film on tape, and how much has his stock risen as a result? You know what I mean? Like,
you might see guys do that at the combine. There'd be certain guys who'd say, "Hell yeah, I'll strap it up and go one-on-one with somebody because I got something to prove." Whereas the other guys may be like, "Hey, my position is pretty much solidified. I'm not going to go out there and go against Zach Walletto or Nick Zacagel and let them embarrass me. gonna do that.
I was curious. So you guys kind of thought you guys said what I was thinking, but I was just like, why do they do it at the Senior Bowl and not here?
That was my thing, Cole. That I was gonna, because you put these. I was definitely gonna talk about one-on-ones because I do think that's. I think the thing that frustrates me the most about the combine is when you hear the announcers start to try and draw anything possible from. The one I hate the most is when wide receivers start running routes, and I'm like, that's not like, yes, I can see some movement skills, but getting open, separating on a football field is not just about athletic ability. It's about play strength and it's about processing. And if you're not going up against anybody, I'm not going to be able to see you use those other two aspects of getting open. I'm only going to be able to see your movement skills, and even your movement skills should be in relation to the defender. So it's that kind of stuff that I don't that kind of stuff doesn't really teach you too much, and you shouldn't really be taking too much from that kind of stuff apart from movement skills. I always found it interesting listening to Thomas Dimitrov talk about how they used to use the combine, and it was purely for that. It was purely for them to really evaluate movement skills across the players where it was most important with, and that's what you can use it for, right, unless you bring in an element of competition. But I'm with Chris. I think they were already trying to organize a boycott of this combine event there, and I can't remember what that was for. So about, I don't know, not great TVs in the locker room or something. So.
Well, they want to create like a bubble, and they're like, well, we're not even like bubbling anything else. You just want to bubble the And then there was something around, they were going to give everyone their food, and they're like, I don't know, probably Daniel Flale is like, I need my 18 pancakes in the morning. I got a 40 to run. I can't be relying on what you're handing me. You make a good point, because like even I can. You ask me to run a slant, I'll get open. I won't catch the ball, but I'll still get open against nobody. I think that's interesting.
You don't have a great catch radius, do you, Cole? I've heard.
I'm 5'8", so I mean, and I don't have long arms. I mean, that's really where all this anger in me comes from. That's why I'm telling you, man. If I was just 6 inches taller, I'd be in the NFL. I tell Mike that all the time. So now is probably my favorite part of this this talk we're going to have, and that's kind of previewing the guys. We're going to get it down to the granular level. Everyone's kind of picked 3 guys that they think are really going to show out, and I want to get right into it. Let's pass it over to Mike first. Mike, who are kind of your 3 combine darlings?
I had to look back at the list because I was trying to remember it. I was trying to do it from memory, and I'm like, I got like 30 guys I want to talk about. So I'm glad that I looked at the list. So my 3 were Devontae Wyatt, Boye Mafe from Minnesota, and Ahmed Sauce Gardner out of Cincinnati. Wyatt, as you might be able to tell from the background. There you go. I may be unofficially starting the Devontae Wyatt campaign at 14 to the Ravens if they stay there. I'm probably not 100% all the way there, but I'm probably like 80-85% there. I think he's, by all accounts, he's supposed to test really well. And I shared a tweet from you guys right before we got on, Matt Miller, and he did something that I've only been thinking about. And that's why I've kind of been pushing him as much as I've been pushing him, because I've had the name in the back of my mind, but it's one of those comps that's like a blasphemy kind of thing. So you don't even do it. You don't even speak the name. You don't say it because you're like, you can't compare anybody to that dude. I didn't, so I feel safe in saying, okay, well, Matt Miller did this.
Please direct all complaints to Matt Miller.
He was saying, hey, I'm not saying he's this guy, but just in terms of testing numbers, there could be some closeness to Aaron Donald. And, he kind of listed Aaron's stuff and what Devontae's projected stuff is supposed to be. And then, of course, we'll see, at the end of the week. But in my mind, that's been the thought process. Not that Devontae Wyatt is going to come out and beat Aaron Donald. I don't want to put that on him. I don't want to put that on anybody. I don't know what they're going to be. Just be the best Devontae Wyatt. But just that really, really good interior pass rusher is something that I feel like is obviously beneficial on every defense. But I think the Ravens, you're looking at them trying to get younger on the defensive line. We don't know if some guys are going to be back. We feel pretty good probably about the edge. I mean, I know both guys are kind of coming off injuries, but when healthy, I think you feel pretty good about Dafe Owe going into year 2. Obviously, Tyus Bowser has kind of established himself and you know what he is. And then a couple other guys, right? Dalen Hayes, Jalen Ferguson. For what he is, I think we know what Jalen Ferguson is. And, you know, Justin Houston last year. We'll see what they do in free agency. We'll see what they do in the draft. But I feel like that piece in the middle, getting 2 of those guys. You got Justin Matabike, who obviously has flashed his ability. I think the pass rush is still coming along a little bit. I think the run game stuff has been really impressive. I think the pass rush is coming along a little bit. But you add a guy like Wyatt in there, and now you got 2 of those dudes in there who can really rush from the inside, and you've got that edge presence. I think you're cooking with something there. Boye Mafe out of Minnesota, he's an edge guy. Speaking of edge guys, a guy who probably came on the scene a little bit for people at the Senior Bowl as the week went on, just got better and better, and then you kind of saw it peak in the game. I think he had 2 sacks or something like that in a game, but just another guy who's reportedly supposed to test really, really well, 40+ inch vertical, probably run in the 4.6s. I think I've seen. But, a guy like so many of these guys, I think we've all kind of been having this discussion internally, who are from other countries, a lot of times from Nigeria, some country in Africa, and they come here, they haven't had like a ton of football playing experience in their background, but they're really, really athletic dudes. And they get over here and they get in the game and they're young in the game. So the ceiling is sort of untapped in ways. You don't really know how high their ceiling could be, but you just see these really, really raw athletes. And he's another one of those guys. If you look at his rush rate, right, just how many times he rushes the passer versus how many times he gets a pressure or a sack over the last 2 years, because that's really when he's kind of had the most of his playing time in Minnesota. I think he's only behind like 2 guys. He's behind Will Anderson and maybe one other guy. So, I mean, he was getting pressure commensurate to the number of times he rushed. He didn't rush as often as Will Smith. As Will Anderson. I'm thinking about Fresh Prince. Based on how many times he rushed, the pressure that he was able to generate is pretty impressive number. So I think there's definitely some come up to be excited about with him. And then Sauce Gardner, I mean, I'm not going to say a whole lot because I think his tape speaks for itself. Everybody's been pretty high on him, and he's been connected to the Ravens a lot throughout the mock draft season. I really just want to see what he runs. And like Chris and I were talking about, and Chris made the point after seeing some of his 2021 games, it almost didn't matter that much to him anymore. He's like, look, he can move, he can cover, he's long. I really don't even think that it's super relevant anymore. I'm just curious, because to me, that would be like the one thing that maybe you still have kind of like an open question about. But if he comes out and he runs well, then you're like, okay, yeah, I don't have anything anymore. I mean, everything else I'm good with. So those are my 3 guys.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Great start. Chris, let's kick it to you.
Yeah, my first guy is Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas. He's probably going to be a guy that comes in there and has the biggest hands ever recorded at the combine. He has to get specially made gloves, 5XL gloves, which is ridiculous. And it's not just a cute thing where his hands look like Mickey Mouse. He actually catches the ball like that too. So, I think he's a physical freak, but I think because he's so big, he doesn't look as fast. But there are times on tape where you see him outrunning Alabama defenders. And of course, they're Alabama defenders. NFL is different. Everybody's going to be faster in the NFL. But damn it, if you're playing at Arkansas and you're outrunning Alabama defenders, you're fast. That there's no way around it. And I think he's going to run faster than a lot of folks think, because he's 6'4", I believe, like 225, 6'3", 225. That, and he's going to be moving at the combine. Some of the questions that I do have are the change of direction stuff, because you do see him kind of round out some of his routes and not be as crisp as, say, like a Justin Jefferson, for example, where a guy that's slimmer and able to control his body just a little bit more. You see him kind of round out those routes. But I think he's going to blow it out the water with his 40. I think he's going to blow it out the water with his explosions and his jumps, all of that divert. I think he's going to do really, really well in that, because you see it on the after the catch stuff where he catches the ball and he's bursting up the field, and you see that initial quickness and explosion from him just on the field. So I think this will be an arena for him to just show that off, and especially when you see how big he's going to look next to the other wide receivers, is going to look fake. The other guy who also makes people look like their children is Trayvon Walker. Um, he's just a guy where there was one rep where he was chasing Bryce Young, quarterback from Alabama, and he was just full speed chasing him, and like he was just shaking so much that my laptop almost started shaking. Like that's how much power you see coming out of this dude. Like he's just powerful and fast as well, obviously. And I just think with how big he is and how powerful he is, because he's not only is he's big, but he's like the Thing from the Fantastic Four, where it's just like a lump of rocks. And you see that in his build. And a guy that's built like that isn't supposed to move this way. And I think he's another guy that those explosion drills, he's going to knock out the water. Uh, Similar to Treylon Burks, like I think he's going to struggle a little bit with the change of direction numbers, like as far as the 3-cone and all of that stuff. But I don't think he's going to be a sloucher. He's not going to be a what's his name, Ferguson. I forgot, Sack Daddy. He's not, he's not going to be one of those dudes.
Coming after all the guys. You got coming after all my.
My bad, Mike. That's Miles Boykin, Ferguson.
Rashad Perriman.
No, I won't mention Correa. So, but Trayvon Walker, man, going back to him, I think he's a guy that he's getting a lot of love right now, especially after Dane Brugler had him 6 overall in his top 100, I think it was, or top 50, and for good reason. That he's a guy that you can see the potential. He's just scratching the surface right now as a pass rusher, but you see him do all of the dirty work on the inside. You see him do the dirty work on the outside, where he's freeing up teammates. He's not a selfish pass rusher at all, and I think that's something that teams are going to love from him, because he's willing to put himself on the line and just really wreck stuff, be the bull in the china shop. And I think once he gets into a program and he really starts getting it and it starts clicking for him, you're going to see a guy kind of like the way that we saw Rashawn Gary, where the light came on this year and we saw him take that next step. But I do think Trayvon Walker is going to be an interesting one. And my last one, I'm going to go with Andrew Booth. I know I had another one there, but I'm going to go with Andrew Booth because he's been my guy for a while now. So he's a dude that I think I know Mike mentioned Sauce earlier, and I think he's better than Sauce. I think he's a guy to where you can see his quickness, his cat-like reflexes, and it's so impressive when you see the click and close from him. It's like a typewriter almost, where he's just smooth and on it right away. Now, the thing that I do question is his long speed, because we've seen him get beat sometimes when he's caught flat-footed, and you'll see him get beat over the top occasionally. I want to see how fast he runs there, because if he can put up, let's just say like 4.43, I think he should be a no-brainer top 15 pick in my opinion. And he's one of those guys that I think where we see that the drill where he has to really shift his weight and move his hips, I think he's going to do well in that kind of drill.
Love it. Yeah, no, he is smooth, very smooth runner. I think Trayvon Walker might throw the barbell on his first rep right out the damn gym. Just with that explosive long arm that he has, like that thing is nasty. I was watching that Kentucky game again, and it's just like those dudes were just done by the end of that game. Like that's just a long day of sledding for tackles when you're getting hit with that. But James, let's go to you.
Yeah, so the thing I like about both Chris and MC's guys is that most of them on my report, it will say explosive. So it'd be good, I think, with both of those. It's always to focus on the 40 and those things, but I think it's important to look with those guys at those jumps and to see that measurable explosion. And my first guy, I think, is a guy who it's going to be really interesting to see his his tests in those explosive tests in the jumps, but it's Jordan Davis, the massive defensive tackle out of Georgia. I think Davis was one of the first guys I did, and the explosion from him just jumps off the tape. And I think the reason why I want to sort of bring him up is because, you know, he's obviously not going to test. He's going to test in the middle of the pack in terms of the sort of ranking. Just if you don't look at the height and weight adjusted scores as you see on the relative athletic scores site that MathBomb does on their website, I think like you're going to see a guy who for that size is just going to be a ridiculous tester. There is no way that he really should have a vertical leap or a horizontal leap that's anywhere good, because he's trying to shift 340 pounds. And it's going to be ridiculous. It's not going to look ridiculous when you put it in contest with everybody else, but it's going to look if he gets anywhere near 5 seconds flat, which I think he might in the 40-yard dash, that's absolutely insane for the size that he is. And the best thing about Jordan Davis is it shows up on tape. You know, those movement skills show up on tape. He moves ridiculously well for his size. And I think that he's been a little bit lost amongst lots of other players that are getting a lot more sort of hype and love. And I don't think that this is a guy that, I think the raw tools that this guy has, you just can't ignore it. And there are times when guys like this come out that you just can't pass up that kind of raw piece of clay to work with. And so I still think there's a chance that he's the pick at 14, even though I know that there's been less sort of hype around him recently and he's dropped down in a lot of mock drafts. I think my second guy is a guy who will be at the top of all of the lists, and that's Dax Hill, Michigan safety. So Dax Hill was one of the highest recruits in the country coming out. He was a very highly regarded recruit. And so we got to see loads of his measurable testing from back when he was, I presume, when he was 18 years old. And I wrote down a couple of them. So he has a verified 4.340 already at 18. He has a 43.6 inch vert verified already, which would have been good for the second place in last year's combine of every position. So Dax Hill is really freaky, and he's going to show out, I think, this week. I think the thing that's most impressive about Dax Hill that I like is that Michigan moved. I gave him one of my red stars, which is something that I don't bestow easily. It's usually reserved for about 5-6 players in the draft. And the thing that I love about Dax Hill is that his play speed is as fast as his measurable speed. He plays up to that speed because he's a very intelligent football player. He was asked to do a lot on that Michigan defense. They moved him around all over the place. He had to cover man to man. He had to play zone. He played single high. He came down and covered tight ends. Just a bunch of stuff he did at a very high level. And he just deployed his speed exceptionally well. You can see him do it on tape. You can see him get from the far hash to the far sideline at times and make plays on the ball. So I do think I think the kid is special. I don't know. There are some concerns around him about sort of that might preclude me from taking him at 14, but I don't know. I would be interested just because I do think very highly of the kid, and he will blow up the combine. I think he's a guy that some people don't necessarily know is that athletic. He really is. And then the final guy, continuing on that theme, actually, of guys that I think people really don't understand is athletic, is Chris Olave. So Mike and I both love both Ohio State receivers. We think Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are both extremely smooth. I've been on Olave for a long time. This is the third off season I've evaluated Olave. The first time because I quite liked him. The second time because I was convinced he was coming out and did a full report on him, and obviously then he didn't. And now this is the third off season, and I just think he's very smooth, and there are lots of things to love about his game. But one of the things that isn't entirely obvious, I think, when you're viewing him as part of the Ohio State offense, which has speed all over the place with Jackson Smith-Njigba and Travion Henderson. Like, there's a bunch of speed everywhere on the offense. So you don't necessarily associate Chris Olave with being, obviously he got deep and was catching a lot of deep balls, but I don't think you necessarily associate Chris Olave with being this amazing athlete. He was a track guy in high school. He ran a 10-800 meters. So this guy is also going to run extremely fast. And I think when you marry that with the receiver skills he has, this guy's technically very good as a receiver. I think you get a really interesting prospect, and you start to see, there's a lot of people who look at the Ohio State offense and think he wasn't as productive, but there's a lot of mouths to feed. And I do think that he's, the skills that he has, you see him high in mock drafts, you see him high in rankings of the guys that I trust for a reason. And it's because he has that speed to marry with all the technical aspects of playing receiver. So I think he'll blow up the combine a little bit too. And it's a little bit unexpected, probably.
Yeah, you make a really good point there, because I think that's something that we might have missed when we talk. It's seeing guys do things that, and I mean, this applies to pretty much any Georgia player on that defense, but seeing guys produce athletically, just maybe they weren't asked to do those things in college. Like you could be looking at a linebacker who mostly played in the box and didn't get too rangy. Maybe they run a little bit better and look fluid. Receivers, their ability to threaten deep, maybe they just weren't used that way. So, there's always that picture of how a guy is used versus what they're going to be asked to do. Like even looking at a Daniel Falale, like, I think he's a guy that's going to test, similar to Jordan Davis, where he's probably not going to put up, best numbers at his position, but he's going to put up really good numbers for how big he is, right? So, and that's what you have to consider, and you might get an idea of, okay, obviously there's some things he needs to do in his vertical set that needs to be developed technically, but here's what he can do in like his 3-cone, his 40, like you can see the athletic prowess in him. So, I think that's a really good point, something to hit on. I think that's really important. And then for my 3 guys, I got to admit, I stole this first guy from the Athletic Pod, but once they mentioned him, I kind of dove into his background and was just fascinated. And that's Dominique Robinson, the edge out of Miami, Ohio, converted to edge rusher from wide receiver last year, going into his junior year, which is just, it's something. It's something, all right. And I just think like having that wide receiver background and obviously had that skill set at one point in his career, I think he's going to test out the roof, and he's a guy that needs a lot of work. He's going to be taken in that round, probably 4th round guy. But in an edge double dip that I'd love to see the Ravens do, if they could have that first pick be that kind of top solid, opposite Oweh and Bowser, and then they want to get a developmental guy, what better than to get those physical tools? And so he's someone I expect to test out test out the gym. And then the other 2 are 2 guys in the trenches, and Trevor Penning and Charles Cross. Both guys, I think I'm only expecting them to test so well because their O-line coach that they're working with pre-draft keeps teasing it. So if they don't deliver, I mean, he's gonna have the egg on his face. But like Duke posted a picture of like Charles Cross doing a vert, and I mean that man was high, or at least it looked like he high. I mean, he might have been only jumping over a roll of toonies for all I know. Oh my God, you guys don't even know what toonies are, do you? And that was always the basketball joke up here, is like, you couldn't even jump over a roll of toonies.
You gotta tell us what the
toonies are our $2 coin up in Canada.
Oh, I thought it was candy.
We got toonies and we got liberties.
I thought it was someone from Boston, isn't that right?
Something like that.
Yeah. I am expecting Penning and Cross to test well. I do think Penning's got some. I don't think he's the kind of guy that I think is going to be a really fun discussion, because Mike and I talked about this a lot when we did his film. Guy that doesn't have a very good play speed in the run game, but someone who's expected to test really well. Made Feldman's freaks list, but that doesn't show up on tape. So it's that kind of conversation. It's like, okay, he tested well, And he's the kind of guy that now that he's got a little notoriety from the Senior Bowl, once he tests well, it's like, boom, top 10 pick, right? But, you go go back to the film and it's like, he's got some athleticism. He's an aggressive dude, but and this is something Mike says and something that I'm not stealing from him because this was his, can he block the guy in front of him? And that's something that he's the perfect guy to have that conversation about. So I'm expecting him to test well, but we're still going to have to go back to that film and kind of be like, okay, it's not quite showing up on film, especially when it gets out in space. Why is it? And that's kind of the beauty of this process. You take that information in and then you kind of go back to the film and it's like, all right, he did this, but why didn't it show up? And then, what's that speculation? What's that projection? Is that what his potential is? Can he get there? If I'm a zone team, am I comfortable kind of risking it for that type of projection? Because I know he has that athleticism. So that's kind of a fun projection. And then Charles Cross, we talked about him quite a bit in our group chat. He looks like he's going to test well, very fluid player, someone that I think could have a really good 3-cone with how fluid his hips are, someone that should test in the short shuttle time really well. Seen a lot of comments about the arm length, so it's interesting to see what he's going to come in. Hope to God those arms are 33 inches and he falls to 14. I'll hop all over him. So those are kind of my three. And then the last thing I want to hit on, do you guys have any, in this combine, any guys that are invited that you kind of consider sleepers? Someone that could, we kind of touched on a lot of the top guys. I think most of these guys are first, second, couple, maybe mostly first and second round guys. But are there any sleepers that could kind of test out the roof that could really, maybe we're not getting enough buzz about? Is there anyone you guys want to mention?
I got a couple guys. And you know me, I'm bad at following directions.
And that's why we love you, MC.
Was when we were talking about sleepers, I was thinking about like sleepers that I like just as players, and then I was like, oh, well, this is a combine show. Probably should be thinking about guys that are actually going to test well. Because, but I mean, look, you could throw out. I don't think is he there? No, I was going to say Cody Wells. He's not there. Troy Anderson is there from Montana State, I think. So he's a guy who's expected to really test well. Athletic guy, played 3 different positions in college at Montana State. He was linebacker, running back, and quarterback. And I want to say he was all conference at all 3 positions. So really athletic dude there. But look, I'm going to get my 3 guys in. It's not because they're good testers. I just think they're players to keep an eye on. So it's Jaden Peavy, defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Not a guy that I was looking for at all, but because I was looking at Leo, because I was looking at Michael Clemens, even looking at Tyree Robinson a little bit, I saw this big giant dude, this big 92. I was like, who is this dude? This dude is huge. And then he started showing a little first step quickness, a little burst or whatever. So I looked him up. Former high school basketball player, didn't even play football his first 2 years in high school, but then transferred over to basketball because he was 6'5", like 260, 270. And, his coaches were telling him like, hey, if you top out at 6'5" as a basketball player, 260, 270, and you're not like a guard forward, like you don't have handles, there's no future for you. But there is a future for you in the NFL, on the football field with that kind of size, because you can still continue to put on some weight. So he actually played in one of the All-Star games. He was in the Collegiate Bowl, and his measurements, freaky stuff. They listed him as 6'6". He's actually 6'5", 319, 36-inch arms, and almost 11-inch hands. I think it was like 10 3/4 inch hands. So he's a big dude, but you still see that kind of developmental curve for him because he is relatively new to football. But go watch which game was I watching? I think it was LSU, Texas A&M LSU, maybe from 2020. And I think I even put some clips out there. He's got some first step quickness and some explosion. So there's something there to work with. Sam Williams from Ole Miss, edge rusher. I don't really think he's a sleeper. I think people kind of know about him, but because it is such a deep class, maybe his name kind of falls down a little bit, but was a late add to the Senior Bowl. I think really quick and explosive. I know our guy Ben Fennell was asking some questions about his 40, saying, is he going to run in the 4.6s? And he was like, I've never ran 4.6 in my life. So he's expected to be like 4.4, 4.5. We'll see if he gets there. And if you want a game to watch him against, go watch him against Ole Miss. Go watch him against Charles Cross. He plays for Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Watch Charles Cross. And he gave Charles some business at various points in that game. So good edge rusher. bendy guy. He's got a little bit of that bend. And I don't think that we see as many of those guys as Ravens fans. I think over the years they've kind of gravitated more towards the power rush kind of guys, even though maybe with Oweh they're starting to kind of change that mold. But Sam Williams gives you a little bit of that bend. And then last guy was also at the Senior Bowl, Jatyree Carter, HBCU kid out of Southern, played tackle at Southern, but his week there at the Senior Bowl, I think he played left guard, right guard, took some snaps at center. Another high school basketball kid, although he did play football in college. He was a tight end in college, but really good basketball player. Chris saw some of the highlights today, but his team, they won a state championship down in Louisiana. He played for White Castle High School in Louisiana. I think 6A was the classification they were in. So they won the state title in basketball while he was there, with him kind of being the guy leading the way. So again, another guy with some room to grow, because I think he was 6'3", 306 at the Senior Bowl, because he probably does project more as a center and maybe a guard for some guys, but he's athletic. So you could see him in his own scheme, being able to move really well. So he's a guy that I'm kind of interested in. So I don't know how they're going to test. People may be listening and hear these names and then go see these guys test and be like, this is some trash. These guys get it was about what I saw on film. And based on that, I do kind of want to see how their athletic testing measures up, because I think they were all pretty good. Obviously, I think Sam Williams is going to run fast, but the other two guys, I think they moved well for their size. And so I kind of want to see just athletically, and then with the on-field stuff, how they move, just to see if that kind of marries up.
Love it. Yeah, two guys that I think, and I mean, admittedly, one of the best tools we can get for college football in terms of testing numbers that exist is from Feldman's article, because he's able to get his hands on that information when he builds that. But he mentioned guy Cam Jurgens at a center of Nebraska that MC put me on, because I think he's listed light, but I think looks like he's got the potential to add to that frame. And you showed me a couple of those gap blocks that he had, and it kind of projected quite well. But I know Feldman had in that article, he had a 405-pound hang clean. He squatted 723 and had a vert of 34.5. So he's the kind of guy that could really test well for the center position, obviously position the Ravens are going to be looking at. A guy that, got to go back and look at that play strength while he's in games. But, if it matches out and he tests that well, something to look at. And then another guy, and I think it mostly stood out for his vertical, but Alec Pierce at a Cincinnati wide receiver, someone that I think could be in that third, fourth round, BPA picture for the Ravens. Maybe not fourth round, probably third round. But I think he had a broad of 11 feet and jumped 40 inches. And that's at 6'3", 215. So, big receiver, explosive guy in terms of the Ravens looking for that X receiver, kind of if you want to put so much stock into that. But if they're going to replace MC, plug your ears. If they're going to replace Miles Boykin and in that lineup, he's someone that could be in that picture. As kind of the big body red zone guy. So, that was someone I wanted to throw out there. Chris, did you have any guys you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, one I want to highlight is D'Angelo Malone. He's a guy that really popped out during the Senior Bowl. He was just terrorizing the tackles there, and he's a little dude. He only weighed in at 235, and he was getting into dude's chest like if he was 260, And I think his explosive skills and in the explosion drills, they're all going to really, really pop for this dude. He's a smaller guy, but powerful. One of those guys that can convert the speed to actual power, and in a legit way. I think we see it kind of, sometimes it flashes on tape, but I think with him, it's something that we see consistently. And at the Senior Bowl, we saw it against top level guys, where it's just mano y mano, and he's putting on his big boy pants, and he's really bringing the ruckus to them. Another guy is someone that Mike actually put me onto, was Tariq Woolen. He's a dude, really long cornerback, 6'3", 6'4", and I think it was Dane Brugler that said they had him with the tracker, and he had the fastest time that they've ever had in all the years that they've been tracking.
24 miles an hour. Like, I can't even drive that fast.
So a dude to be that big and moving that fast is it's like a cheetah. You know, it doesn't even make sense. It's going to look fake at the at the combine when he's running. Um, and the last guy that I have is Calvin Austin Jr. Uh, a common theme. All of these are really light guys. Uh, Calvin Austin, he's like 5'7", I think 165 pounds. But you put on the tape, and he doesn't play little. Like I think we see that with Hollywood, where Hollywood will play little, and you see him get touched, and you're like, damn, I hope he's not hurt. But with Calvin Austin, you don't feel that. You know, with Calvin Austin, he's a fast track dude who's a football player, and he relishes the contact, and he can actually bounce off of some tackles. And I think one of the most fun games I've seen this year was his game against Cincinnati in 2020, and he was going up against Sauce, and you kind of saw Sauce like kind of buck up a little bit, and he was like, "Damn, man, this is a little dude." Like, you see him, and Sauce is a confident guy, so for that to be for there to be a little kind of chink in the armor, you you take notice of that, and he really put on a show against Cincinnati. So he's someone that I really want to see how he tests and just how he looks overall in his physique, because 5'6", 165, that could be a wide range of things. He could be have a smaller frame, or he could be a little bit bulky. So I want to see how he carries that weight around and just how he's built.
Love it, love it. Yeah, one guy I wanted to hit that I was expecting MC to mention, because MC put me onto him. But MC puts me onto a lot of guys, so I mean, if he can't list all of them, and that's Jeffrey Gunter out of Coastal Carolina, because he's got that freak. He was 8th on Feldman's freaks list. 6'4", 273, jumped 39 inches, broad 10'2". Did he bench 435? He did 225 30 times. Squatted 525. Power clean with no wrist straps 365, and his pro shuttle time is 437. So this is a guy that's going to probably test out the gym. And I mean, I haven't watched his film yet, but I was watching when you sent me his name. I looked up just one of those, highlight videos or whatever. I was just kind of screwing around and saw him running step for step with Puka Williams. Like, what is going on here? So he's the kind of guy.
It was last year watching Taron Jackson, who I think I drafted.
Yeah. And he's the kind of guy that I think the Ravens would love. I think that role in that defense is called the bandit, and it's kind of what we envision our Sam, where they're going to drop any coverage and do that kind of stuff. So there's a guy.
I think Drew was high on him, but Drew has moved on. So
yeah. So that's a guy to keep an eye on in terms of kind of later round guy that could test out the gym. And James, who you got?
Yeah, I think I missed the brief more than MC, so bear with me. But I think I picked two guys. I mean, they're quite well known because they're skill position guys, but so they're probably not really sleepers. But I've seen plenty of places where they both go day 3. So that sort of fits the bill. But the names that people will know. But I wanted to talk about them not because they'll test out the gym, but because I think their testing is important this week. The first guy is Damian Pierce, who I absolutely love. Damian Pierce, I think he was criminally underused at Florida. If anybody's kind of watched his tape, especially the Georgia game, sort of makes you so frustrated for the way that they used him. No one ran on Georgia all year except Damian Pierce, and he did it. He did it. So he has possibly the most. I'd have to go back and look, and I haven't been systematically grading this trait for a long time, but I'm pretty sure he would grade out pretty high in terms of my all-time grades in contact balance. That he just bounces off guys, and he seems to gain momentum as he gets hit and kind of resets himself and goes forward. And I think the thing about I like his footwork too. I think he will fit pretty well in a gap scheme. He follows pullers pretty well when they get up to the second level. There's a bunch of stuff that he does well. He presses his keys well. I really like him as a player. I just want to see what his long speed is. There's times when his foot speed looks a little bit suspect, and then there are also times when I think he's shifty rather than explosive. I see a bit of like some good lateral quickness, but not necessarily the explosion that I'd be looking for. Sometimes the explosion comes when somebody hits him, knocks him sideways, and then he regains himself, and it looks like it was explosion, but actually it was his contact balance. So I want to see how he tests, which I think will then dictate where he goes in the draft and what his value is. But he's a guy who was very underused and could be a guy that is very useful in the league. And then the second guy that I wanted to mention was Justin Ross. Justin Ross is really interesting. I sent a message to some people that I know back after his freshman year, suggesting that he was going to be a top 10 pick in a couple of years. And if you go watch his freshman tape, it's not that much of a leap to think that he could be a top 10 pick. And then he suffered a really horrendous back injury that threatened his career, really. I think it was spinal related. So it was a really difficult time for him, and he sat out the whole of his sophomore year. And then he came back this year, and he wasn't the same guy. He just wasn't the same guy as that freshman year. He just did not look the same guy. And I think the thing that's changed my mind a little bit on him and makes me want to go back to the film with a kind of pure look at the film and possibly even put more focus on the freshman year was Lance Erline mentioned it in the recent Athletic podcast with Dane Brookler. He mentioned that I think before I say what he mentioned, most people think that Justin Ross's decline in this past year was a permanent decline because of a terrible spinal injury. But actually, Zillan was saying that he found out that he fractured his fifth metatarsal, right at the start of the season, and the kid played through it. And I'm not surprised he played through it because he couldn't showcase how good he was the year previous. So he just got on the field and played through it. And I need to go back and now watch that. And I think what I need to go back and watch it is after we see how he tests, and then go back and watch that last season of his and see if there's a bit of context that his testing can add to what it is, because we need to know what he is, like what it is. Is the spinal injury, is the really, I can't remember if it was spinal. I don't want to mention it when it isn't. The really difficult injury he had, is that going to be something that is the reason why he wasn't as good in his last season? And can we put some more weight in that freshman tape? I think the combine will be big for that.
Yeah, great points. Definitely an interesting guy, and someone
that's a good. I had not heard that, and I just watched him recently. I watched 2018 and this year, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because now I need to go back and rewatch what I just watched, because I'm combining the two and I'm factoring in the quarterback, because there's a big difference between Trevor Lawrence and the guy who was here last year. But just watching him, just isolating Ross, I thought what he was really good at was 2018 was at the top of his routes. Really a lot of separation he would create at the top of his routes, like exploded coming out of breaks. And I didn't see it this year. And I was like, man, what is that? Because of the more serious injury? I don't know how that would affect his lower body. Maybe there's a connection there I'm missing. But now if there's a foot thing, I'm like, okay, that would make that more understandable why I didn't see that same level of explosion, because he was separating in those. I watched the Natty back in 2018, and I think one other guy, South Carolina, because he went up against J.C. Horn a couple times. And you could really see him come out of those breaks with some explosion. I didn't see it in 2021. 2021. So that makes sense, though. Thanks for that.
Yeah, another guy, too, I want to throw out there is Cade Otton, because I think he could actually test pretty well athletically, but he's would look to me like a pretty good blocker. So, I mean, that's kind of at least look willing. So that's what I'd kind of like to see, is how does he test athletically to, some of that move ability and what he could be asked to do in the tight end free role, if the Ravens want to explore that. Need to double check if he's at the combine. I'm assuming he is, but just someone who just kind of went off the top of my head. Another guy that I think is going to test out the gym, and I probably should add him in my 3, is our guy Icky. Because I saw a quote today from the NC State coaching staff that said he's going to I think maybe he didn't say outperform. I think he said he'd perform as well in the 40 as Garrett Bradbury. And that's going from a center who's pretty light in the pants to a 6'4", 330-pound offensive tackle.
He was a track guy in high school. He ran the anchor.
I remember we talked about that. He also won the Nice Guy Award. Or what was it again, James? Was it the Nice Guy Award?
Yeah, I think it was, wasn't it? Was it? Yeah, I can't remember, but it was something ridiculous, wasn't it? That
He ain't
he's
nice on the field, though.
yeah, it's his demeanor, isn't it? It's totally different once he puts the pads on.
But this was awesome, guys. This was exactly what I was hoping to get out of this. So many good nuggets throughout this discussion. And, we talked before. I think, we're going to have to get together again very soon and talk about some evaluation things more broadly. Because, we all four of us talk all day, pretty much every day. You get us on a stream, I think we could. We might just top the Deep Cover podcast with Brian McFarland. I think we'd go 3 hours. So I just want to thank you guys so much for doing this. Had an absolute blast. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button so I know. We'll be bringing more of this to you throughout the off season, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.